The mics are unmuted. All right, great.
Great. Good evening. My name is Jerry Zimmerman. I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of the Lehigh Valley. Welcome to this evening's election forum. And I'm pleased to remind you that this evening is a forum, not a debate. We know that the issues of our upcoming elections are important to each of you, and we are most appreciative of the time that each candidate is giving to participate in this special event. We thank them each and extend our sincere appreciation in advance to all of you for joining us. As I noted, this is not a debate, but an excellent opportunity to hear from each campaign individually and to clarify their positions on issues that matter to our Jewish community. We know that you will be respectful of both candidates, regardless of your political position. Each candidate will have 40 minutes with Q&A, and questions have been submitted in advance so that we will manage them from here. We'll take a brief break between candidates, and again, thank you for joining us and for maintaining decorum throughout the program. Also, don't forget to vote on November 8th. Thanks for being here this evening, and we look forward to a lively conversation.
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome everybody, and Chag Sameach. It's a good opportunity during the Jewish holidays to hear from our candidates. We're learning this is not really a sukkah, but it's a community sukkah because we're all together. Bruce, Rich, and I are honored to be moderating this important forum today. And thank you everybody who's joining us on YouTube. I know the weather is not great, so glad that we can now do a hybrid event. Many of the questions you're going to hear today are related to topics of interest of the Jewish community. Every candidate has an ample opportunity to share their views on significant issues that affect everybody in Pennsylvania, but today we're going to directly address issues that affect us as the Jewish community of the Lehigh Valley. So I apologize in advance if I don't ask a question that was submitted, but we are trying to keep it in the Jewish content. With that in mind, Bruce, do you want to ask the first question? Oh, the camera's right there. So.
Why are you the best candidate for this position? And what are the three most important things you want to accomplish as our congresswoman if you are elected or re-elected?
Press.
First, let me just say thank you to everybody who is here. Thank you to the JCC and the Federation.
Yeah, the microphones. Yeah. Let me see. Okay. There.
Okay, start over again. Thank you. Can everybody hear me now? Which is always a silly question to ask a group of people, because if they can't hear you, they're not going to raise their hand. Anyway, thank you so much to the Federation. Thank you to the JCC. Thank you, Jerry, for your comments, and Bruce and Aaron as well. And most of all, thank you to everybody who's participating in this great democracy by engaging in our political process and listening and learning more about candidates and their positions and that kind of thing. I just think it's incredibly important, so I'm really happy to be with all of you. The question, Bruce, as to why I think I'm the best person for the job and what my top priorities are, I think can partly be answered by the work that I have already done. I have the good fortune and privilege of having represented Pennsylvania 7 for 4 years now, and the work that I have done has been wide-ranging. It's a multitasking kind of job. You do not just focus on one thing, although we all, of course, have very strong specific interests. My work has primarily been focused on what matters here to the constituents of Pennsylvania 7, as opposed to wide-ranging issues that matter to the entire country, and obviously a lot of the issues are similar among districts. But I always consider the most important part of the job to be responsive to and hear the concerns of the people of Pennsylvania 7. And so the work that I have done has been guided by those people. And the first thing I started hearing from people about when I started running for office in 2017 was concerns about health care, concerns about the cost of healthcare, the cost of prescription drugs, and that kind of thing. I have been very, very focused on those issues. I think it's really important to recognize that we are fortunate enough to have two outstanding healthcare networks here in the Lehigh Valley. Not every district can boast of the kind of healthcare that we are able to get here, but we still have problems with accessibility and affordability for some people. And so I've been very focused on that. I've been very focused on making sure that we can bring drug prices down. We just recently made our very first inroad in that after me shouting it for 4 years at everybody I could find in the Senate, in the House, and everywhere else on Capitol Hill. It's kind of been my signature issue, so I'm really proud that we've at least made our first inroads on getting prices down of prescription drugs with Medicare negotiation of drug prices, which was never allowed before. So that's huge. It doesn't affect everybody yet, and that's a concern, and it will continue to be a big mission for me. Another thing that's been very important to me in my work in Congress has been mental health issues. I fully intend to continue to be a leader in that field, and to work to make and by the way, that is the most bipartisan issue I hear about. People on both sides of the aisle have themselves or constituents who have been affected by the mental health crisis in this country, and it's just a fact that we simply do not have enough providers, and we absolutely need to make sure that we are taking steps to encourage more people to go into that field. And finally, because of the nature of this forum, I have to say that the work that I have done on the Foreign Affairs Committee is incredibly important to me. I am, just by way of background, I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm also on Education and Labor and Science, Space, and Technology. In Science, Space, and Technology, my focus has very much been on the manufacturing sector, which here in the Lehigh Valley is critically important. I'm really proud that a bill that I introduced has been passed, the Regional Innovation Hub Act, which would create 20 tech hubs around the country. So instead of just thinking about the Silicon Valley or the Triangle in North Carolina, my vision is that the Lehigh Valley, the greater Lehigh Valley area becomes one of those tech hubs. We are already situated and ready for it. We've got the schools, we've got the technical schools, we've got the community colleges, and we already have manufacturing infrastructure. And then finally, I started to talk about foreign affairs. The work that I have done in foreign affairs is deeply important to me. I am a globalist. I believe that we are all interconnected. I think that my position on foreign affairs has put me in a unique position of being able to get involved in a number of things that have been very topical, including what's going on in Ukraine. The second week of the war, I traveled to Poland with a bipartisan delegation, and we saw firsthand what was happening with the refugees that were streaming across the border. So I don't want to keep going because I suspect there are a lot of questions, but those are the reasons, those are the things that I've worked on, want to continue to work on, and why I think I am the best qualified person for this job.
Thank you. That's very lengthy but very important answer. So let's get into the important topics for our Jewish community. According to the FBI annual data on hate crimes, crimes targeting the Jewish community consistently constitute over half of all religion-based crimes in our country.
So in 2021 alone, incidents of anti-Semitism in the U.S., including threats, vandalism, assault, murder, reached their highest levels in over 40 years. What is your plan to help us combat this epidemic?
Well, the problem of hate crimes and anti-Semitism generally is a huge concern. It's something that I've been very involved with in Congress, and I think that we have to recognize that the anti-Semitism is a real and present threat, and the rise in incidents of hate crimes is something that we all need to be very, very concerned about. It's a very important and personal issue to me, frankly, the issue of anti-Semitism. I am Jewish. My children were raised as Jews. They went to preschool and kindergarten right here in the JCC. I want my children to grow up, well, they've grown up. I shouldn't say I want them to grow up, they're grown up. But I want them to be proud of their Jewish heritage. I don't want them to be afraid to display it. I want them to be proud members of their federation. And I want to make sure that that their Jewish faith is central to their identity. And I think that what we have seen is of great concern in terms of the discrimination and prejudice that we have seen around the world, not just in the United States. But I've signed on to a number of bills that I'd be happy to talk about that are designed to combat that. But also, I have to point out here, we also have to take steps to mitigate the harm that is being done in the existing space of hate crimes. So, for instance, I was a co-sponsor and voted for the resolution against anti-Semitism. I was one of the members of Congress who urged President Biden to appoint an ambassador to combat anti-Semitism. I voted for a resolution to make sure that we were providing security to our, not a resolution, a bill to make sure that we were providing additional security to houses of worship, including synagogues, of course. So these are all issues that are very much in the forefront of my mind. As I said, it's personal. It's not just a political issue to me.
So just as a note, Bruce, check your microphone. Just people are having a hard time. So if you want to check that your microphone is unmuted. No, we can't hear you. So just check the box to see if it's unmuted. So hit the gray button. Now try again.
Hello.
Perfect. Got it. Susan, let's get a little bit more into the anti-Semitism or Congresswoman Wild.
You can call me Susan.
Susan.
I prefer that people
Yes.
do.
The stories that we continue to see, particularly on college campuses against Jews, are alarming. It started with BDS and anti-Zionism, and then it became very clear and evident this week, particularly that anti-Semitism is at the forefront of a lot of college campuses. What can we do, or what can we do in Congress? What is your plan that we can do in Congress to help college students feel free and safe on campus, and that they can practice freely their faith and feel proud to be Jewish at college campuses?
First, I have to say that the BDS movement concerns me terribly. I am also a co-sponsor and voted for the resolution against BDS. And I think that, sometimes I get pushback on that from some people who start talking about the First Amendment and people should be free to do and act and associate as they please. But I think that our college campuses in particular have a special responsibility. When people go to college, they are, at least for the first 2 years, most of them, it's their first time away from home. They are still very impressionable, even though I know that nobody that's college age wants to think of themselves as impressionable, but they are. And our institutions of higher learning have an obligation to make sure that they are not being subjected to propaganda. And so while I certainly don't have, any criticism of teaching about issues that may be controversial in this room and elsewhere, I, at the same time, do not believe that colleges should ever be in a position of condoning what amounts to anti-Semitic behavior. I think that it's very, very important that we, in our public schools, that we are teaching Holocaust education and that people know about it.
You want to bring your microphone a little closer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better? Okay. I feel like it. Okay.
You're good.
But I think that it's really important that we, this recent surge of banning of books in public schools, it's almost an anti-education move, if you ask me, and it really concerns me. And I have to say, I feel like it's essential to say that it's very alarming to me that a major party nominee for governor of Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, has uttered clear instances of anti-Semitic comments, behavior, and that distresses me a lot, and I don't know how we got to this point that is acceptable. I'm not suggesting that it is acceptable, but he's been nominated by his party, and I would, quite honestly, I know this is not a debate, but I will just say that I would call upon my opponent to condemn his anti-Semitic remarks, and I'll leave it at that.
Before we move to the next question, just want to just bring it again to the college campuses. Is there anything that Congress can do to help in this regard, whether it's passing legislation or supporting any legal ramifications for the students to feel safe, and for particularly the student unions who are pushing this anti-BDS voting and anti-Semitic, no Jews allowed, no Jewish voices allowed? What can Congress do to play a role to change this particular feeling that we have of helplessness right now in the Jewish community with our college students?
I don't think that federal resources should ever be permitted to be used by an institution that is engaging in that kind of behavior. I also think that for anybody who is paying for college, that the idea that student fees and tuition can be, I assume you were referring to the Penn State situation recently. I'm not sure which example you were pointing to, but the fact that Penn State is allowing one of the Proud Boys, or one of the founders of the Proud Boys, to come and give a comedy show on campus is really alarming. And I don't, I don't think that any public funds should be used for that, and I don't think any student funds should be used for that. I think that we can condition the resources that the federal government provides to colleges and universities on making sure that they are not permitting that kind of behavior. It's very alarming that, my son went to George Washington University. I also graduated from law school at GW, but many, many years ago. When my son started there in 2011, I was just appalled by the clear evidence of anti-Semitism, of BDS, of behavior and publications and posters and stickers all over the place that really showed not an acceptance, but a willingness to tolerate that. And that really, I think, has to stop. I think that the colleges have the first responsibility, but I do think that the federal government should refrain from or make their resources to these schools conditional based on that.
Related to anti-Semitism, bringing it into our community, one of the issues that keep coming up for our community is that we're constantly working in assessing and increasing the security needs of our Jewish community, of every nonprofit. Every year, each facility has to apply for additional federal funds to keep us safe, and particularly security grants to address those concerns.
So how would you address the security concerns of our local synagogues and other houses of worship and faith-based agencies?
It is a shame that we have reached the point of having to have the kind of security that we have now here and at our synagogues and other houses of worship. When my kids went to preschool here, you could walk in the front door freely, and we really and that was not that long ago. So, it's troubling that we're at that point, but we are, and we have to be realists about it. And so I mentioned in my opening remarks supporting the funding of security grants that do have to be applied for. My office actually did a webinar for all of the houses of worship, including synagogues, about how to apply for the grant money. I would absolutely vote to reallocate the money for security grants in the next Congress. In fact, I don't think it's enough. I think at the rate that we are going, that amount has to be increased. So that's at the federal level, that's the best thing that we can do, is help you to be safe. There are probably a number of things that need to be done by all of us as a society to curb this kind of dangerous behavior, but I think that's beyond the scope of this question.
On a related topic of the same sense of urgency, particularly for what we've seen in the news this past week, Iran has been in the news once more. There's been brutal repression of women inside of Iran and of the protesters. And with their support of the invasion of Ukraine and the providing of kamikaze drones And at the same time, the U.S. seems to be on a path to re-enter the JCPOA agreement with Iran that will give the regime billions of dollars in sanction relief.
So with that in mind, what is your position on the U.S. re-entering the JCPOA Iran deal?
Let me start by saying I am absolutely 100% committed to working to prevent Iran from building or obtaining nuclear weapons. I'm going to push back a little bit on your statement, Aaron. I don't know that we are about to re-enter the JCPOA, quite honestly. It's obvious the discussions in Vienna have been going on now for a long time. It's frequently in the news. I, as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, get classified briefings on a regular basis about what's happening in Vienna. I have not been particularly impressed by what we've heard from the administration, and it's obviously a serious concern that we are hearing that Iran is just always moving closer and closer to being able to build a nuclear weapon. So I have to tell you that if we are at the point, if those negotiations in some way succeed and it looks as though we are going to be able to re-enter the JCPOA, or that there's going to be a vote on it, or that the administration intends to, I absolutely believe that we have to make sure that there is comprehensive diplomatic and national security strategies to address the challenges that are posed by aspects of the Iran nuclear program that are subject to the sunset provisions of the JCPOA. That's the sunset provisions concern me the most. Iran is, and one of the other reasons that I push back a little bit on the statement that we might be headed towards a new JCPOA is unless there is complete capitulation, which I don't expect there will be, by the U.S. to some of Iran's demands for that deal, I don't see, I just don't see that happening. I don't see us going into it. And I certainly hope that the U.S. will never re-enter the JCPOA without taking care of those sunset provisions, which were ill-advised in the first place. I think we have to continue to impose sanctions against Iran for bad behavior. And I have to say at this point, I'm not a huge fan of sanctions generally as a tool in the world. They hurt people who are often innocent civilians. But the fact of the matter is, and there's a lot of academic discussion about whether sanctions work against Iran and so forth. But I am very, very concerned by, you mentioned the drones in Ukraine. Obviously, we know that Iran has continued support for terrorist organizations, ballistic missile programs, and all kinds of malicious activities. I have written, along with some of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, to the White House, urging them to address these concerns in their negotiations with the Iranian regime. I think it's made some difference. And I recently signed onto a piece of legislation that would permanently extend the Iran Sanctions Act, even if a new JCPOA were to go into effect. And finally, the last thing I'll say is that I feel it's very important that we have to have the buy-in of Israel if we are going to re-enter the JCPOA. So finding a deal that's acceptable to the United States, acceptable to Israel, and acceptable to Iran, I think is a pretty tall order. So I don't know that I really believe that that's going to happen. But obviously, the goal has to be, regardless of whether it's through that agreement or otherwise, to prevent Iran from ever possessing a nuclear weapon.
So, with that in mind, as part of what Aaron said, how can Congress be more supportive of the internal protests calling for change inside Iran?
I have to say, I have to, sorry, I keep hearing myself breathing, and it's a weird.
You can straighten it out if you want. Straighten out there you go.
Okay, how's that? Is that better? Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you for the advice. I think that we have to be as supportive as possible. Okay.
If you want to take it out of the thing and then just hold that.
Just hold it.
There you go.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Is this okay? Good. I know there's.
Brad is taking.
I can't do anything.
Yeah.
I don't.
Brad is taking care of the feedback.
Sorry about that.
We don't either. It's okay.
How is your microphone working, sir? Working well.
Yeah. Let's try this one instead, and then see. I will turn it off.
Thank you.
There. Yeah.
Testing.
Brad, do you want to turn off microphone 1? Oh, it should be on. Okay. Try it again.
Testing.
No. Let's try.
Testing. It's down my clothing. Okay. Can you hear me now? Great. Wonderful. Now I just have to remember what's happening inside Iran right now. You can't hear me. They can't hear me.
Let's try now.
Hello.
Brad.
Good? Okay. All right. Excellent. I think that the courage that has been shown by the women in Iran and young people in general, including many young men, is commendable. The question is, what can we do to support that? And that's a very challenging question. I mean, obviously, we can use our leverage as a world power. We can use our leverage in connection with this JCPOA that may or may not come to fruition. We've got to use every possible means of leverage that we can to support the people who are rising up in Iran and fighting back, because it's unprecedented and it's very, very brave. About the only thing I can think of is that we could increase sanctions if there's bad behavior towards these individuals, but sanctions are already at a pretty high level, so I'm not sure there's a lot we could do in that regard. But I think we always need to show our support and voice our support through statements and otherwise, although I don't know what their freedom of information is like, and I doubt that they have a whole lot of access to what we are saying in the Western world to know that we are supporting them. Hopefully they have some idea.
Well, we're talking about Iran, so let's continue with the topic of the Middle East, and let's talk about Israel for a few minutes.
So we know you voiced your opposition to the BDS movement. You did here a few minutes ago. However, more and more voices in Congress have been calling for conditioning aid to Israel as a means by which to influence Israeli policies. Do you support this? And if you do, why?
I do not. I think we have a unique relationship with Israel, and I'm going to push back again and just say that there are a few very loud voices that talk about conditioning aid to Israel or reducing aid to Israel. It is certainly not the position of the Democratic caucus, certainly not my position, that Israel's aid should be in any way conditioned. The position is that we should follow the understanding set out in the MOU, and that we need to continue to provide unconditional support to Israel for many, many reasons.
So one of the important things that we have seen in the last couple of years has to do with the change that we have seen in the region. All of a sudden, enemies or countries who aren't speaking to Israel anymore all of a sudden have warm and welcoming relationships based on people-to-people relationship and not necessarily between governments. The region has been reshaped and real peace seems to be possible again.
So do you support the passage of the Israeli Relations Normalizations Act, which seeks to build on the success of the Abraham Accords and expand normalization agreements between Israel and other countries in the region?
So the answer to that is yes, I do support it. I disagreed with the prior administration on a number of things, but I was very much in favor of and proud of the progress that administration made in furthering normalization between between Israel and Arab nations. I expressed my support at that time. I still very much support furthering normalization. I think it is good for the people. I think it's good for the region. I think it's good for security issues in general. And I will continue to make it clear to the current administration that that is my position. We have already, but we will continue to make that clear.
Has there been any news that maybe you want to share of some of the things that you're hearing in your foreign affairs role about what's next and who's next to sign peace with Israel? We saw the situation happening in Lebanon today and the agreement that has been reached in the Lebanon border. Is there anything else that our audience should know about things that you can continue working with the administration in your role in the Foreign Affairs Committee to help with the building of peace in the region?
Well, I think there's pretty widespread agreement among the members of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And by the way, one of the reasons I like that committee is that for the most part, it's quite bipartisan because so many of the issues that we deal with have to do with the U.S. relationship with other countries, national security, and that kind of thing. But I think we really need to get discussions of a two-state solution back on track. I feel as though that's been neglected for far too long. We've had some discussions. Ultimately, that's the only path to peace in the area. And I think it's vital that we do that. And I think that you can do that while keeping Israelis and Israel safe and secure, but at the same time recognizing some rights of the Palestinian people and making sure, because if you don't, then you will never have a two-state solution. You'll never have peace in Israel and in the Middle East. And I think that's really where we need to be working. So on the Foreign Affairs Committee, my hope, and I can tell you that we've had a number of discussions about it, is how do we work on a bipartisan basis to encourage talks to resume. Obviously, we're all awaiting the elections in Israel on November 1st, and we don't quite know what the government will look like until that's over. I suspect that it's going to be a coalition government with a very slim margin, much as we see here in the United States. But it's incumbent on the United States to work with that government, whatever it is, towards that goal.
So we're going to move to the portion of we have picked 3 questions of we received several questions, but we tried to group the questions into related issues to the Jewish community, but they continue to repeat each other over and over again. So we build them into topics. So we want to ask you some of the questions that we've seen over and over again. The one question that keeps coming over and over and over has to do with reproductive rights.
So what is your policy positions regarding reproductive freedom following the Supreme Court decision?
I firmly believe that it is not my place or any elected official's place or any government's place to be in your doctor's office. And I think that a decision about reproductive rights is solely to be made between a woman, her partner, if appropriate, and her physician or healthcare provider. It's very interesting to think about the fact that we have HIPAA, which has gone a long way towards making sure that private medical information is not disclosed. And yet, we've got a situation where many states, now that the Dobbs decision essentially returned this reproductive rights issue to the states, we see states enacting laws that very, very much infringe on people's right to privacy. And it's not just elective abortions that we're talking about. We are talking about people who are in the unfortunate position of having a miscarriage, fetal demise, products of incest or rape, and sometimes the health of the mother is implicated. But I really firmly believe that it is, whatever the circumstances are, and there are other circumstances that I haven't outlined, that it is not our role as the government to be involved in that decision, and I strongly believe that we need to, I think we, it's interesting, so we passed in the House the Women's Health Protection Act, which would codify Roe. I actually think that Roe does put the government somewhat in the position of getting involved in these healthcare decisions, and so I'm not really going to go into how I feel about Roe specifically, but I do feel very, very strongly that I don't belong, and no other person in the government belongs in making that medical decision for anyone.
Thank you. I think we talked a lot about anti-Semitism and about hate. So the next question that was asked about is a little bit about introspection. So Bruce, if you want to ask that question.
So what is your plan to combat those radical voices inside your party?
So as I said before, I think that there is an abundance of oxygen given to some of the loudest voices in the Democratic Party that are not representative of the views of many other Democrats. And by the way, the same is true on the Republican side, that there are some absolute extremists, and the entire party has now been labeled as that party of extremism because of it. So, look, we do have the First Amendment, and people should be able to voice their opinions, but when it borders on inciting hate crimes or inciting anti-Semitism or is an affirmation of anti-Semitism without actually using the words, but nonetheless it's pretty clear what the intention or the motivation is, I think we have to curb it. And I will tell you, we've passed resolutions which aren't enough by any means to actually, condemn the behavior of and the words of some of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I don't think it's a satisfactory solution, but short of telling people what they can say, which is counter to our principles in this country, there's not a whole lot else. But I think what's really important for people to understand is that the number of people that you are referring to is actually such a small number. We call them the majority makers in the Democratic caucus. The majority makers are people like me from very purple districts, from very moderate districts, and our views and our actions and our votes reflect our moderate positions. And so I think it's unfortunate that cable news really favors the screamers and doesn't pay more attention to a lot of the moderate work. Look, I'm one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. 70% of the bills I've introduced are bipartisan bills, introduced or signed onto. I have worked across the aisle on a lot of very pragmatic bills that, frankly, aren't sexy enough for cable news to bother to cover, but they make a difference in people's lives. I mean, the quick example I'll give is I worked with a Republican member of Congress from Pennsylvania during the COVID pandemic to make sure that we got more certified nurses' aides in nursing homes, and I think there's probably nobody that doesn't think that's a good idea. And we had a lot of sign-on from both sides of the aisle, but you'll never hear about that kind of bipartisan activity because it's just doesn't drive ratings.
I think that was probably bringing us closer to the last question before we bring an opportunity for you to bring closing remarks, because time really flies when you're having a good time. The 7th district in Pennsylvania is a divided swing district. Over the past decades, we have seen the House of Representatives become much more partisan in its behavior. So what is a couple of the issues that you think you can work with the opposite party to accomplish something that reflects the more moderate views of our congressional district?
Well, thanks for that question. I will tell you that I'm fond of saying that when you represent a purple district, as we call them, where you've got almost an even number of Democrats and Republicans, it's much more intellectually challenging than if you're in a safe red or a safe blue district, where you can just essentially vote the party line and not really worry about it. I like that intellectual challenge. I like hearing from people in our district and knowing what their concerns are. And it drives the work that I do. I mentioned one example of a bill, but I honestly believe, that the only way we get things done in Congress is to do it on a bipartisan basis. What we don't want is either party to have a supermajority where they can just ram things through and don't have to work with the other side of the aisle. I think that's a real concern, and it doesn't matter which party you're talking about. One of the greatest experiences I've had as a member of Congress was when we went to the Polish border in the second week of the war. 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans were selected to go on that trip. I was fortunate enough to be one of them. And let me tell you, when you spend 3 days both flying there, flying back, and on the ground with your colleagues, you become close, you talk a lot, you eat dinner together. That's the kind of solidarity that we really need to see more of. And we came back from that trip, the 8 of us, with a clear plan for what we thought our position, the U.S. position towards Ukraine and the conflict should be. And we communicated that as a group of 8 to our colleagues, and we made it clear that we all had signed on to that, and that's what we thought needed to be done. Not all of it was done, by the way. There was some issues having to do with transfer of planes and that kind of thing, which we were all dismayed about, and we actually called out the Department of Defense for not making sure that they got those planes. But the point is, the only way you move forward, both as a Congress but also in this country, is to work across the aisle. It is absolutely essential to do. I'm proud of the friendships that I have across the aisle. I'm not saying that I'm friends with every Republican member, and there are probably a few that I will never be friends with. But the same thing goes, by the way, within my own caucus. I'm friends with a lot of people who have vastly different views than I do. But I really consider the educational part of this job to be one of the most important. Going to Israel in August of 2019 with a large number of people from the freshman class. I had been to Israel numerous times before that, but many of my colleagues had never been to Israel. And that trip was a great example of people learning about Israel, its concerns, its geography, why we support the Iron Dome. We actually saw the launching pad for the Iron Dome. It's really, that kind of thing is just critically important, and I only mention it in the context of Israel because of this forum, but there are so many areas where we can learn from one another. And one of the things that I liked best about that trip was I was in a position as somebody who knew a few things about Israel to answer questions that my colleagues had, to help them understand some of the issues. Obviously, there were leaders on the trip that did most of that, but it was a really nice feeling. And by the same token, I learned from a lot of my colleagues on issues that I don't know as much about, and that's just really important. And you can't be ignoring somebody's knowledge or opinion simply because of their party affiliation in Congress.
Bruce, you get to ask the last question.
Yes, well, probably the most important one, and that is, what do you want to share with our community before we head to the ballot?
I think what I would like to say, in addition to everything I've already said, and making it clear that I am very much a pro-Israel member of Congress, and by the way, Israel is probably one of the only subjects that my opponent and I have almost no light between us, no disagreement on the issues. I believe very, very strongly in the Jewish concept of tikkun olam. For those who are in the viewing audience who may not be familiar with the concept, it refers to repair of the world. It can be interpreted and is interpreted in a large number of ways: charity, kindness, social justice. But it's all based on the idea that Jewish people have an obligation to not only take care of themselves, but to look out for the rest of their community, their world. And I consider that to be one of the most profound and wonderful concepts of Judaism, and I try to practice it, and I believe that the work that I have been called to do in this position is very much in keeping with that. When I am in Washington or here, by the way, I consider my responsibilities when I'm back here in the district to be every bit as important as my responsibilities in Washington, in fact, in many ways more important. But, you know, to listen to people, to know what their concerns are, to try to solve problems for folks. Not all of them are immediately solvable, but as much as possible. And to really always be looking out for the betterment of the people of Pennsylvania 7. This is a great place to live. You all know that. We have a lot to offer. We've got a vibrant healthcare sector. We've got a vibrant manufacturing sector. We've got unbelievable institutions of higher learning. We've got great community colleges and so forth. I could go on and on and on. But the fact of the matter is that in no community in America is everything perfect. There are people who are not enjoying the great things about the community, and there are always things that can be made better. And that, to me, is part of this principle that I try to live every single day, of abiding by the concept of tikkun olam. And that's me, that's who I am, it's who I always will be, whether I'm in Congress or not. And I just want everybody to know that I consider it to be the greatest privilege of my life to represent this district. And I hope to continue to do it. I've gotten a lot of work done. I've had a number of bills signed into law, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and I look forward to the challenge. Thank you.
We're going to take this opportunity to thank Susan for her time. I see Ginger was in the back, so if Ginger want to go grab Lisa while we give Susan a round of applause for sharing this wonderful opportunity for us to be able to hear from her directly. We're going to take a 2-minute break while we bring Lisa and we walked Representative Wild out, and we will be back in 1 second. If you're watching us on YouTube, we'll be back in 1 second, and if you're here, you can go grab a little glass of water, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Thank you, everybody, and we'll be back in a second.
Okay, let me go get extricated from this. Yes. This thing.
You can walk.
Yeah, I'll get my
Wild, and we had a very respectful crowd coming in, and so we're asking the same decorum for Lisa, who has donated her time to be here to speak to us about the important issues of the Jewish community. We want to welcome Lisa back to the JCC, and how wonderful it is to see you in our community. Most of you heard the introduction, but for Lisa, who's coming in, although we have spoken a lot of times about the intention of this forum is to inform our Jewish audience of some of the important topics who you perhaps don't get the opportunity to speak with other audiences, but here in a Jewish community center in front of a Jewish audience, you get to share some of your thoughts and ideas that can help support the Jewish community. So welcome and Chag Sameach. We're going to be asking the exact same questions that we ask Representative Wild. So if you have heard these questions before, you get to hear two very different visions of how our Jewish community can deal with the same issues. So with that in mind, Bruce, why don't you get us started with the first question?
I'd be delighted. Let's start with a basic question first. Why are you the best candidate for this position, and what are the three most important things that you want to accomplish as our Congresswoman if you are elected?
Can I ask a question first? Wasn't there a 5-minute opening?
Oh, you can start that. This is for the opening.
Oh,
so
okay.
So you get to do your opening now. This is sort of the invitation of the question for the opening.
Fantastic. Okay. Can you please repeat the question then?
I'd be
I'm sorry.
delighted. So, why are you the best candidate for this position, and what are the three most important things that you want to accomplish as our Congresswoman if you're elected?
So, my name is Lisa Scheller. I'm running for Congress in Pennsylvania's 7th Congressional District, which is right here. And I'm running to protect the American dream and to stop the Democrats from turning it into a socialist nightmare. Now, I am the granddaughter of Jewish immigrants who came here more than 100 years ago. They came here seeking the American dream. They were oppressed in their countries of Romania, of Poland, of Austria, through pogroms and other things, and they came here seeking that American dream. For my grandfather, that American dream was to run a manufacturing company, and that's what he did. He started a manufacturing company in 1945, and 77 years later, I'm an engineer, I'm not a politician. I run that same manufacturing company headquartered in Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, where we have 160 great folks in manufacturing jobs that we export our products all over the world. And 40% of what we make is exported, and I'm extremely proud of what made in America means. Now, my parents taught me a lot of great things. They were my role models, and they told me to stand up for what I stand for, and they told me to become a part of the solution if I could become a part of the solution. And they also told me that when God blesses me, when I am blessed, I have the obligation and the privilege to give back and to give back to the community. Let's just call that tzedakah, okay? So I became a part of the solution in 2010 when we had a tax hike here in Lehigh County. I was a commissioner, I was elected, I cut taxes, saving residents and businesses nearly $50 million. And I became a part of the solution in 2018 when, as I watched the opioid epidemic unfurl, I broke my own anonymity of being in recovery for 35 years at the time, founded Hope and Coffee, a coffee shop employing addicts in early recovery, helping them get back into the workforce, living productive lives. And I became a part of the solution, partnering with LTRIC, creating what was once a small endowment, but now one of the largest private endowments at a community school, at a community college, helping some of the most disadvantaged youth in our community get a quality education, because a quality education leads to a quality job, which leads to the American dream. And I've become a part of the community within the Jewish, a part of the solution within the Jewish community, whether it has been through my being a Lion of Judah right here with Federation, my support of Jewish Family Services, the treasurer of the Jewish Day School who brought it back to fiscal stability when I was the treasurer. My children went there for 10 years, or for even my support of this organization right here, the JCC. I love this country. I'm an American, and I'm a Zionist. I I describe myself as a Zionist because I also believe that the existence of Israel in the existence of Israel as a Jewish state, but also the necessity of Israel as a beacon of light and hope to the rest of the world and a partner to the United States in protecting freedom. Tonight I want to talk to you about the issues facing America and the issues facing Israel and the bond that we need to have within Israel, between Israel and America, my ability to solve problems and to create solutions that are going to strengthen that bond and provide and maintain and promote the American dream for generations to come for all of us.
Thank you. I think that was a great way of an introduction to get us in some of the questions. And so one of the most important questions that we're asking is, according to the FBI annual data on hate crimes, crimes targeting the Jewish community consistently constitute over half of all religion-based crimes in our country.
So in 2021 alone, incidents of anti-Semitism in the U.S., including threats, vandalism, assault, and murder, reached their highest levels in over 40 years. What is your plan to help us combat this epidemic?
Anti-Semitism is Jewish hate and Israel hate in its purest form, and we are seeing these crimes rise. And you know what? I'm no stranger to anti-Semitism. I grew up in the town of Tamaqua, a town of 6,000, where I was the only Jewish. We were part of the only Jewish family for many years that lived there, and I felt the sting of anti-Semitism. I had pennies thrown at me. I was called a Christ killer, and it was a form of anti-Semitism that I think the community was not really aware of. It was more through ignorance than through hate, and they needed education. And as time grew on, it got better. But right now, we are seeing anti-Semitism increasing in our country. And I also see it myself. Some time ago with my Georgia Tech, where the president of Hillel was banned from going to a college-based event because they held it on a holiday, first of all, and they thought, well, no Jewish people will attend. And then when she decided to attend, they told her that she could not enter. And it entered, you know, we need to take legal action against what is going on in our country. Most recently, and very alarming to me, just in the past few weeks, UC Berkeley created a zone where they said there could not be Zionist speech because they equate Zionism with apartheid and Israel. I'm going to stand up against that. We need to make sure that there is no place in the United States to treat anti-Semitism and to be accepting of anti-Semitism. As someone who loves Israel, I will be standing up to anti-Semitism in all its forms, but not just anti-Semitism, to all discrimination, because we all deserve to live in a country free from discrimination, where our houses of worship are safe, our communities are safe, our schools are safe, and we can walk down the road, or we can go to school, or we can go to our business and not have fear of being chastised or discriminated against for any reason.
I'd like to continue the conversation, particularly on college campuses, because the rise of anti-Semitism that we see on college campuses is something that, as you mentioned, continues to really grow. We haven't seen a decline. We have seen an increase, and in fact, it has become systematically problematic. So in your vision as our possible future Congresswoman, what do you have a concrete plan that we can implement to use to push universities and schools and higher learning to force them to combat the rise of anti-Semitism on campuses?
To be specific, I would say that, one, we need to stand up against it. Legal action needs to be taken against it. We cannot have professors or speakers being banned because the views that they share are not in line with the woke culture of that university, or the liberal, the woke culture that wants to silence us. We need to make sure that our Constitution is upheld, a Constitution that allows freedom of speech, even when that speech is not something that we want to hear. You know what? one of the things that concerns me about our education system right now is that we are being taught, our children are being taught what to think, not how to think. And that if we are being taught what to think and something is going against that what we want to think, and then they say, well, this is not what we want, that this is not what we have been taught. You know, when I went to school, we were taught how to think, how to solve problems. There are changes that we need to make that run deep, that run even as deep as our elementary schools and our school system, and teaching in what we are teaching our children. Not a woke culture that teaches our children to discriminate each other by our differences, whatever those differences are, but a culture that teaches our children how to think and how to create solutions to these problems. On our college campuses, we need to stand up to this. Our colleges and our universities, you know, again, I don't want to speak to funding for universities because I guess I really need more information on it, but we need to make sure that our colleges and universities have in place the structures and the discipline and the policies that will prevent this kind of discrimination against any organization.
I think the other issue that keeps coming up in our community and that we're constantly working is assessing and increasing the security needs that our Jewish community faces, particularly with the increase on anti-Semitism around our country. Every year, one of our facilities has to apply for additional security grant to address those concerns.
Yes, so how would you address the security concerns of our local synagogues and other houses of worship and faith-based agencies?
You know, like I said in my previous answer, our houses of worship, our schools, our communities need to be safe. And the way that I think and crime is on the rise everywhere, okay? It is not just at our houses of worship, but just take a look at cities like Philadelphia, where they've had over 1,000 carjackings this year. What we need to do is make sure that we are combating crime everywhere, that we are putting in, that we are making sure that our law enforcement officers have the tools, the authority, and the respect that they need to keep our families, our communities, our schools safe. You know, what we need to be doing is making sure that our criminals are treated like criminals and that our law enforcement officers are treated like heroes. What is going on in our government right now, and my opponent has supported this, is the defunding of the police. And that means what they have done is they've taken away qualified immunity from our police officers so that no one is wanting to join the police force. If you ask our police forces, they are very understaffed right now as people are retiring. Nobody is coming back in. We need to make sure, and my opponent has voted for this, we need to make sure that our law enforcement officers have the funding, the training, and the support and authority that they need to keep our community safe. And there are other ways that we can keep our community safe, but I am very supportive of our law enforcement officers. In fact, I have been endorsed by the FOP Lodge 40, which is the Association of State Police Officers.
I think one of the ways that our community is very dependent on it has to do with the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which is a fund that's related to and it's appropriated by Congress. So I think the relationship to that question is, would you be supportive? And if you're elected, to voting to either remain with the funding that we currently have or increasing the funding that would allow the nonprofit security grant reach to the smaller communities like ours that requires significant funding to improve our houses of worship and our agencies versus those larger cities who have better access to those funds.
To answer that question, yes, I would. Where we have gaps in our law enforcement and where our local houses of worship or educational nonprofits cannot afford to have that appropriate security, we need to be able to have those grants so that we can have the security that we need to have.
switching a little bit of the topic with the same sense of urgency as we know, Iran has been in the news once more. For one, the brutal repression of women inside of Iran. And for two, Iran supported the invasion of the Ukraine. We just heard about the kamikaze drones they're using to provide to Russia to help Russia in the brutal invasion of the Ukraine. At the same time, we have seen the U.S. to be trying to re-enter the JCPOA agreement that will give the regime billions of dollars to replenish the funds there are sanctions and the international community sanctions have forced upon Iran.
So with that in mind, there's two parts to this question.
There sure are.
There's a lot more than that. Anyway, what is your position on the U.S. re-entering the JCPOA Iran deal?
Let me make this very clear. From the time that deal was proposed, I think around 2015, I'm trying to think a year, I felt it was a bad deal, because any deal that gives a pathway for Iran to have a nuclear weapon is a bad deal. When the sanctions, when they couldn't carry out the inspections and things that were going on, even if Iran was in compliance, it had a 10-year sunset clause, giving Iran that pathway to a deal. I was opposed to it then, I'm opposed to it now. Now, they need, in my opinion, Iran can never, ever have a nuclear weapon. They are a terrorist sponsoring organization. They are an existential threat to Israel, and they are a threat to the United States and the rest of the world. You know, it was no surprise when the sanctions were lifted in 2021 that by May of 2021, Hamas rockets were raining fire and hell on innocent civilian citizens. I feel very strongly about the fact that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, that the JCPOA is the wrong way, because no matter how it is crafted, it ultimately leads to the ability for Iran to have that weapon. Now, why do Joe Biden, President Biden, supported the agreement and wanted to get back into it after the previous administration backed out and created severe economic sanctions on Iran, and kept drawing a line in the sand saying if there's no deal by this time, there's no deal. And then that line got extended. If there's no deal, there's no deal. And today, here we are with no sanctions and no deal and no oversight into what Iran is doing in terms of enriching uranium and creating the foundations for that nuclear weapon. If I am in Congress, I will move and vote for whatever legislation that there is that would keep Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon. Because the threat's not just to Israel and the United States. It's a threat to the Middle East. It's a threat to Europe, as you are now seeing. As you mentioned, they're sending drones into Ukraine. And we need to make sure that any organization that sponsors terrorism and is a terrorist organization is held accountable. Today, what's going on in Iran, are we going to have a separate question about
That's a follow-up question.
The woman who has been...
That's a question Bruce was going to ask. That's the second part of the question.
I'm going to talk a little more about the relationship between Iran and Russia. And that can go to China, too. I see in our administration weakness. That weakness was started with how we withdrew from Afghanistan. And we showed national weakness at the highest level and ended up with 13 brave Americans dying at the hands of the Taliban and losing $80 billion of military intelligence and equipment. In fact, making an army of our enemy in that case. The world was watching. China was watching. North Korea was watching. Russia was watching. Iran was watching. And they saw our weakness. That's what led to Putin having the intention to invade the Ukraine, along with our dependency on Russia for oil and energy. And I can talk a lot about energy, and I hope I can get that opportunity tonight because it relates very strongly with Israel and the Middle East.
So the second part of this question is, how can Congress be more supportive of the internal protests calling for change inside Iran?
Excuse me. Can someone have like a throat lozenge? I have them in my purse. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I have like calls. I'll start answering the question.
I see your campaign is running back
Yeah,
to
they're
our
running
office.
back. I usually carry them with me, and because I've been doing a lot of talking, and
Of course.
I'm so sorry. So we're standing by and watching as we're seeing the absolute display of what tyranny, despotism, theocracy, terrorism is, where people are treated without human rights. We need to be at the UN. We need to be standing up. We need to be making sure sanctions are on leadership, because we want freedom for people. You know, and right now you're watching women being murdered for removing a head covering. This is just wrong. If you bring me my purse. So we definitely need to be in support of the people there, and maybe, you know, providing refuge for those who seek it. So, you know, we can talk about immigration and people who come here seeking religious freedom and come here legally, where there are really issues regarding the human rights violations that are going on there and how women are treated in this country.
I was just taking a break to see if they were coming, but I'll introduce the next question
Okay.
while they get back. And I think our office was unlocked, so they should be able to
Okay.
come back in a second.
I apologize. Sorry.
So I'll do a longer introduction of the questions. I think you're entering into the area of the Middle East, and one of the most incredible things that we have seen in the Middle East is the changes that have occurred in the region, particularly in the last 2 years, and we're referring to the signing of the Abraham Accords and reality of the region, where 2 years ago we could have never seen peace come to the region. We are seeing countries in the region who are now have direct business with Israel, who are sharing intelligence with Israel, who are sharing the resources. Tourism is up. Educational exchanges between Israeli universities and Arab universities are currently happening at a rate that only continues to increase and over and over. So while I reach my hand for the lozenge, I will let Bruce ask a question, and that way you can launch into your response.
Let's see. So we know you voiced your opposition to the BDS movement. However, more and more voices in Congress have been calling for conditioning aid to Israel as a means by which to influence Israeli policies. Do you support this? And if so, why?
Israel is the beacon of light and hope in the Middle East. It is the only democracy. My involvement in Israel is deep and long. I began supporting Ben Gurion University of the Negev back in the 1980s, late 1980s. Ben Gurion University of the Negev was founded on the vision that the security of Israel was predicated on the settling of the South. And so let's put a major university in the South. It's kind of like the Penn State of Israel. I became involved with Ben Gurion University, and throughout the years that involvement increased. Today I am considered a founder of the university. I sit on the board of governors of the university. I own a home in Beersheba, and when people say, why do you own a home in Beersheba? I jokingly say, look, if I wanted to have a beautiful beach, they say, why not Tel Aviv? Why not Jerusalem? I say, look, if I wanted to have a beautiful beach with a lot of Jewish folks, I'd buy a house in Miami. I am absolutely an ideologue when it comes to Israel. I purchased a home in Beersheba 45 seconds within missile reach from Gaza, because I believe that the security, and what David Ben-Gurion said, is that the security of Israel is predicated on the settling of the South. We provide Israel with approximately $3 billion of aid a year. I don't like calling it aid. It's not aid. It's an investment. And what comes back to the U.S. is tenfold that investment as our partner. With those partnerships with Israel, the U.S. has gained medical technology, cybersecurity, water technology. In fact, we used to think the wars in the Middle East were going to be fought over the ability to get water because it is all a desert. Well, through Israel technology, particularly at Ben-Gurion University, Israel now exports water. In fact, one of the largest desalinization plants in the world was recently commissioned in the San Diego area using Israeli technology. But it goes beyond that. I said cybersecurity, robotics, medical technology, desert agriculture. My family and I founded the Zinn Fellows Program, an organization that creates leadership roles through bringing Americans to the Negev, not necessarily to Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, but to the Negev, working with Bedouins on farms on how they can improve their environment and improve their lives, working with the Bedouin society and the registered cities, the registered towns, on how to create a society that thrives for all people in Israel. And like I said, the medical technology and everything else. I also founded the Woodman Scheller Graduate Program of Israel Studies at the Sde Boker campus, in which we bring students from around the world to teach them the good, the bad, and yes, the ugly about Israel. Because I truly believe there is so much good in Israel and what they have created, and they understand the startup nation and how a people came there in the early 1900s and nationhood in 1948 and where they are today in 2022. And these people who come all over the world and learn in English go back to their country as ambassadors and stewards of goodwill towards Israel. Aid should not be conditioned on what Israel does. And I know I know my opponent actually voted at one point that she would think that it should be mandated for Israel to pursue a two-state solution brokered by the United States. It was, I don't remember the resolution number. And you know what? That leads to conditioning on it. You know what aid should be conditioned on? The sanctions that are placed on the terrorist organizations. The United States is giving billions of dollars to the Palestinian Authority that is then turning around and using it not to aid Palestinians, but to give Palestinians payments for terrorism, families whose loved ones commit terrorism and are killed in the process. That's where we should be conditioning aid, not on the marvelous partnership that we have with Israel and what we get from them.
Brad, are we having an issue with the online? Okay. While Brad is working, that people can still hear us online, which is, I think, the most important part, because even though Bruce and I look fabulous and you look great too, it's your message, I think, that that's the most important one. So I think we're going to change this question a little bit, only because you are not yet serving in Congress, if that's the will of the voters. But I think it's an important question that has to do with some of the recent developments that we have seen in Israel. We see that Israel has signed agreements with nations who have never signed them before. This week we're signing an agreement, border support with Lebanon in order for the expropriation of gas. And you wanted to talk a little bit about gas. So why don't we touch upon what would be your ideal scenario, or as you're in Congress, to push for other nations who continue to be enemies of Israel to bring them together to push for peace.
So
Go
ahead. Well,
Go ahead.
Do you support the passage of the Israel Relations Normalization Act, which seeks to build on the success of the Abraham Accords and expand normalization agreements between Israel and other countries in the region?
The previous administration did more for U.S. Israel, did more for U.S. and Israel partnership than I believe any other administration in our country's history ever did. One was the moving of the embassy to Israel. Another was the establishment of the Abraham Accords. Shortly after I participated in May in I Stand With Israel protests in Philadelphia with regards to the war that was going on. I traveled to Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and to Saudi Arabia, and I met with leadership in those countries. I came there I visited those countries both as part of a Jewish and a Republican delegation. But we met by phone with Netanyahu, who was on his last day in office. We met with the Crown Prince and leadership in the United Arab Emirates, as well as in Saudi Arabia. One thing I did, I never dreamed I would ever see in my life, and that was sitting in Ben Gurion Airport and looking at the flight list. For those of you who've been there, they show the flights on a table, and seeing the direct flights to Abu Dhabi and to Dubai from Tel Aviv, and getting on a plane and flying over Saudi airspace to go and meet with folks and go to these think tanks where Israelis and Arabs are coming together to create economic solutions to the problems that we have. It is through economic diplomacy and partnership with countries that is going to create stability and peace in the region. Now, Saudi Arabia has not yet entered the Abraham Accords, but let me be clear, without Saudi Arabia's tacit approval, the Abraham Accords would not have happened. And so they are working on it, and we need to continue working on it. When it comes to energy, I'd like to focus on at home. I don't understand why we went to Russia to get oil and funded a war with Ukraine. I don't understand why after that stopped, we go to Venezuela and Iran and countries that hate America. And then we go to Saudi Arabia and ask for oil. And Saudi Arabia agrees with OPEC to now roll back what they would, want to give us. But even today, and I was very discouraged to hear this, and this is where politics gets involved. Biden went to Saudi Arabia and said, it's okay to roll back the amount of oil production as long as you wait until after the election. This is so discouraging to me. But a bigger thing to be learned is, why are we going to Saudi Arabia for energy? Pennsylvania, if it was its own country, would be number 4 in the entire world in liquefied natural gas. And not only that, our gas here in Pennsylvania is the most pure gas in the world. We could fuel our entire country for 200 years. Pennsylvania could be the world powerhouse for energy. And we could be not only creating jobs here in Pennsylvania, tens of thousands of high-paying jobs right here in Pennsylvania. But we could be exporting gas, liquid natural gas, to Europe, to Israel, to other countries, so that they would not have to depend on countries who sponsor terrorism or who are communist, who do not have the best interest for freedom and the American dream. I don't know why Biden flies to Saudi Arabia. He could come right here to Pennsylvania. We should be opening up our energy, and that is something, as a member of Congress, that I would push for very quickly to make sure that we get our energy independence as a nation.
Well, we're gonna ask for the quorum as we asked for our previous speaker. So you can hold your applauses at the end when we're ready for the applauses. But I think we want to ask the 3 questions that we ask as well, Representative Wild, who were submitted in advance by our audience. So we're receiving questions all day, and we group those questions into 3 topics. And then at the end of those 3 topics, we're going to ask the most important question. So. Which will be for you to share your final views. So let's ask the first question that was submitted by your audience. Bruce, if you want to go ahead.
So what are your policy positions regarding reproductive freedom following the Supreme Court decision?
I've been pretty open about my policies regarding reproductive freedom and abortion, and I will tell you that I am pro-life. And I get those views from my faith. We are, God's children, and we should be protecting life. But I also believe that we should definitely have exceptions for rape, incest, and the health of the mother. These are things that my opponent has actually been lying about my positions, and I just want to make that very clear. The result of the overturning brought the issue back to the states, where states get to make up their own rules. But I will tell you, I don't believe in late-term or partial birth abortion, and that is what my opponent believes. She is definitely an extremist on this issue, voting for legislation that legalizes abortion at the federal level up to and including a full-term 9-month delivery. I think there should be restrictions, but like I said, we need to have exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. At the end of the day, what we really need to be moving towards, though, is creating a culture of life, funding organizations that help women in crisis, women who are pregnant, that help families. Because the discussion shouldn't be, should we have an abortion? The discussion should be about how do we make it so that abortion is not always the first choice.
I think before we ask the second question, do you see a role as possibly your future congresswoman in Congress enacting laws to allow those exceptions that you see in reproductive rights to be codified and legislated so that our court system doesn't have to decide on those decisions, or should the states get to decide and codify? How we should go about that?
As a legislator, I think we should let the states work on this issue first, but I have also said very publicly that I would not support a federal constitutional ban on abortion. And that is how I would legislate. Again, I would say we need to create a culture of life. We need to take funding and make sure that people have a place to go to, that we make adoptions easier, that we make sure that there is a way, if women want to have their children, that they can have their children.
The second question, thank you for that answer and for the clarification, because I know otherwise people would have asked you that following the forum. So the second question that we have has to do about some of the radical voices that we hear inside each of the individual parties, and we asked the same question to Representative Weil regarding the Democratic Party. So now we ask you about some of the voices on the Republican Party. Bruce?
Well, what is your plan to combat those radical voices inside your party?
Well, as I said regarding anti-Semitism and discrimination, I mean, there are radical voices on both the left and the right. Mm-hmm. I will stand up to those radical voices no matter what party they are in, because I believe we all need to make sure that our freedoms are protected. That includes all of our freedoms. That, when our founders wrote the Constitution, they got it right. They said God said all men are created equal, and that our Creator gave us the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then that was translated into our Constitution with the amendments: free speech, due process, freedom of religion, making sure that we have the rights to live our lives as we want to. So when we have radical voices within our own party or our other party, it is our obligation to stand up to those voices.
The final question, because as we all know, time runs really fast when we're having a really good time. And I want to ask a question that has to do with our own district. Pennsylvania 7th District is a closely divided swing district. We're very much a purple district. Over the past decade, we have had both Republican and Democratic representatives who have been known for their bipartisan work in the House. So the question is a simple one. What is one issue or a few of the issues that you see yourself working with the opposite side of the aisle that can accomplish some of the more moderate views that we have in our district in comparison to those districts who are much more securely lean towards Democrat or Republican?
That is really a great question. And you know what? I do have experience working in a bipartisan fashion. As a county commissioner, every major piece of legislation that we did in the county of Lehigh was something that we did in a bipartisan manner, whether it was to become a part of my brother's keeper, or whether it was to work on, decide whether we were going to give county funding to a developer who was going to build a very large development. And we worked together, we talked together. I am absolutely have an open mind to working across the aisle on common sense solutions. I'm an engineer, I'm a problem solver. Where do I think we can absolutely do it? I think we can do it with education. I think we could do it with the budget, with tax reform. These are areas where we absolutely can come into agreement, and we need to work on the areas where we have agreement, not on the, if we agree on 5 things and disagree on 2, we should work on the 5 things that we agree on and make something happen, and then worry about the other 2. So I absolutely know and welcome the opportunity to work in a bipartisan fashion on how we help people, on how we preserve the American dream, so that that American dream is available for future generations to come. Because you know what? I love my children. I'm a mom, and that's what really comes first. I love my children. I've lived the American dream. I want my children to be able to live the American dream as well, and all of our children.
Bruce, you get to ask the last question.
Sure. Probably the most important question, and that is before all these people and everybody watching at home get to go to the polls, what would you like to tell us?
I think the
Would you
question
like
is,
to share
what
with
else
us?
would you like to share with our
Yeah.
community before we close the
Yeah.
forum that we weren't able to discuss today, but you want to share and invite them
I thought
to
that's what
know
I said.
about you?
I'm running for Congress because I love this country. I think I'm the best choice because I believe in the American dream. I believe in the possibility and of opportunity of equality, personal liberty, a trust in the community, to create a culture within this country where everyone has the opportunity to achieve the American dream, no matter what that opportunity is. Now, I'm a business person, I'm an engineer, and I've run my family's business. I have created jobs. I've signed the front of a paycheck. I've seen all parts of the world. I want to put Americans first. You know, my vision for how do you create an economy that grows and lifts everybody up and gives everybody the American dream is low taxes, reasonable regulation, good infrastructure, safe communities, and a quality education for our young people. Like I said, I've lived the American dream. Now, one thing I didn't talk too much about with that American dream is I know what it's like to feel bankrupt. And when I mean bankrupt, I mean emotionally, spiritually, financially, and physically bankrupt. And that was the day before I got into treatment for addiction. Right now, in our own community, the fentanyl crisis is running rampant. And I think that someone who has the experience, who has gotten that intervention and managed to live a sober life for more than 40 years and live the American dream as the result of that, because America is also the land of second chances, is the best person qualified to make sure and tackle this scourge that is now the #1 killer in our country for men and women ages 18 to 45 years old. I see solutions for this, and I want to become a part of the solution. I've done it on a small scale in a community, and it's been successful, and it is something that I absolutely know that I can bring. When a small town girl from Tamaqua can overcome obstacles and go on and become a face of what the American dream looks like, that's what I want for my children. That's what I want for all of our children and for future generations. And that, you know, as I said, my parents said, stand up for what you stand for. I'm going to stand up for what I stand up. I'm going to stand up for what I stand for. And that is the American dream.
What a great way to close the program. Believe it or not, both candidates had the opportunity to address the crowd for 40 minutes, and we have reached those 40 minutes. So I think this is the opportunity for you to show your appreciation for Lisa and her honesty. So go ahead, and this is where the quorum ends. We really want to thank both of our candidates for really presenting their visions. We had two very distinct visions coming up, and the only thing that we can do to make sure that one of the two visions that you support is for you to present yourself and to vote. So we're going to close the program by encouraging everybody to vote, to thank you for being here. And I know the JCC is going to kick us out because we're out of time, but I want to thank our host at the JCC. I want to thank Lisa for being here. I want to thank Susan for her words and everybody who's watching us at home. And don't forget to vote.
Oh.